The first thing Lieutenant Colonel Raven Kowalski noticed wasn't the missile lock warning screaming through her headset, or the way her F-22 Raptor shuddered as enemy surface-to-air missiles streaked past her cockpit like angry hornets. It was the silence. Dead air where her wingman's voice should have been, where Viper 27 should have been calling out threats, sharing targeting data, breathing life into the tactical frequency that now felt as empty as the void between stars. Viper 27, respond, she transmitted, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her aircraft. Static answered back, cold and final. Below, through the early morning haze that clung to the mountains of eastern Syria, she could make out the burning wreckage of what had been Captain Marcus Torch, Rodriguez's fighter, black smoke rising like a funeral pyre against the dawn sky. The man who'd called her Lucky Penny just 12 minutes ago during their pre-flight briefing was gone, reduced to twisted metal and fire scattered across a valley that didn't even have a name on most maps. But that wasn't what made her blood run cold. It was the coordinated precision of the enemy response, the way the missile batteries had known exactly where to look, exactly when to fire. The way the trap had been perfectly laid for two of the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, piloted by two of the Air Force's most experienced combat aviators. Someone had fed them intelligence. Someone had known they were coming. The tactical display in her cockpit painted a picture that defied logic. 12 hostile radar signatures had materialized from what should have been empty desert, a perfect ambush formation that spoke of weeks of planning, of infiltrated communications, of betrayal at levels that made her stomach clench with something deeper than fear. Her aircraft's sensors were picking up electronic warfare signatures that shouldn't exist in this theater, jamming patterns that belonged to technologies years ahead of anything intelligence reports had suggested the enemy possessed. Overwatch, this is Viper 26, she called to the E-3 sentry circling safely in international airspace, her voice cutting through the electronic chaos. I need immediate extraction coordinates and full defensive package. My wingman is KIA, and I'm looking at a technological signature that doesn't match our briefing materials. The response came back distorted, fragmented by interference that seemed almost intelligent in its persistence. Viper, negative on, package, radio comprom, hold position. Hold position. The words that would haunt military historians for decades to come, the moment when everything that followed became inevitable. Because Lieutenant Colonel Raven Kowalski, call sign Valkyrie, had never held position in her life. And today, with her wingman's death weighing on her conscience and an enemy that shouldn't exist hunting her through morning clouds, she wasn't about to start. 300 miles away, in a bunker buried beneath the Pentagon's sub-basement levels, Air Force Chief of Staff General Patricia Hawthorne was staring at a situation display that made no tactical sense. The operation was supposed to be routine reconnaissance, a simple photo run over suspected weapons facilities that satellite imagery couldn't penetrate due to sophisticated camouflage. 2 aircraft, in and out, 30 minutes of flight time over hostile territory, with full electronic warfare support and extraction assets standing by. Instead, she was watching one of her best pilots trapped in a nightmare scenario that violated every assumption her intelligence analysts had made about enemy capabilities. The radar signatures appearing on the display suggested surface-to-air missile systems that officially didn't exist, electronic warfare platforms that represented a quantum leap in sophistication, and coordination between ground forces that implied months of preparation for this specific intercept. General, we're getting fragmentary communications from Viper 26, reported Colonel James Mitchell, his face pale in the blue glow of the tactical displays. She's reporting technologies that don't match our intelligence assessments, requesting permission to initiate full combat search and rescue protocols. Hawthorne's jaw tightened as she processed the implications. If their intelligence had been compromised at this level, if the enemy possessed capabilities they'd somehow missed, then every operation in the theater was potentially compromised. Worse, every pilot they had in the air might be flying into similar traps, guided by the same faulty assessments that had led Torch Rodriguez to his death. "What's our nearest combat asset?" she asked, though she already knew the answer would be insufficient. USS Gerald Ford is 800 nautical miles out, but her air wing is committed to operations over Iraq. Closest available support is a Marine Expeditionary Unit conducting training exercises in Jordan, and they're equipped for ground operations, not air-to-air combat. The general closed her eyes for a moment, calculating odds that kept getting worse. One pilot, alone, in the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, facing an enemy that had somehow leapfrogged decades of technological development without anyone in the intelligence community noticing. It was the kind of scenario that ended careers and started congressional investigations. "Get me direct communication with Viper 26, she ordered. "If she's going to die out there, I want to know exactly what killed her so we can prevent it from happening to anyone else." But as the communications technicians worked to establish a clear channel through the electronic interference, General Hawthorne couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something fundamental about Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski, something that every efficiency report and performance evaluation had failed to capture. Because the woman's voice, when it finally came through the static, carried a quality that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the kind of focused determination that turned routine missions into legends. In the cockpit of her F-22, Raven Kowalski was making calculations that had nothing to do with official tactics and everything to do with survival. Her aircraft's stealth characteristics were compromised. Somehow, the enemy had developed detection methods that could track her through her radar-absorbing coating and angular design. Her electronic warfare suite was being systematically jammed by technologies that shouldn't exist. And her fuel state was dropping toward the point where return to friendly airspace would become mathematically impossible. The smart play was to punch out, activate her ejection seat, and hope that search and rescue could extract her before the enemy ground forces arrived. The safe play was to follow her training, maintain altitude, and wait for support that might never come. The career-preserving play was to document everything she could see and transmit it back to intelligence analysts who could spend months debating what had gone wrong. Raven Kowalski had never made the smart play in her life. At 17, she'd walked away from a full scholarship to MIT to enlist in the Air Force because she'd read about the Tuskegee Airmen and decided that flying fighters mattered more than engineering degrees. At 23, she'd volunteered for the most dangerous assignments in Afghanistan because sitting in the rear with the gear wasn't why she'd learned to fly. At 28, she'd turned down a promotion to staff positions 3 times because leading from behind a desk wasn't leadership at all. Now at 34, with 11 years of flying the most advanced aircraft in military history and a record that included successful missions in 3 different combat theaters, she was about to make the play that would either cement her reputation or end it entirely. Because 200 feet below her aircraft, invisible to every sensor system the enemy possessed, a team of Navy SEALs was trapped in an overwatch position they couldn't abandon without compromising their mission. She'd monitored their radio traffic during her approach, the clipped, professional communications of special operations forces executing a classified mission that her briefing materials had never mentioned. They were calling themselves Bravo 6, and their situation was deteriorating rapidly as enemy forces converged on their position with the same impossible coordination that had killed her wingman. The tactical picture was becoming clear, painted in frequencies her aircraft's sensors could detect, but that ground-based communications couldn't penetrate. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a routine patrol stumbling across American aircraft. This was a carefully orchestrated operation designed to capture or kill high-value American military assets, and both she and the SEAL team below had walked directly into it. Lieutenant Commander Jake Reaper Morrison pressed his face against the scope of his .300 Winchester Magnum and tried to ignore the fact that his overwatch position was about to become his grave. Through the morning haze, he could count at least 40 enemy combatants moving through the valley with military precision that spoke of professional training and foreign advisors. His four-man team was equipped for reconnaissance and surgical strikes, not pitched battles against mechanized infantry supported by surface-to-air missile systems that belonged in a different decade. Bravo 6 to any station, he transmitted on the emergency frequency, knowing that his communications were probably being intercepted, but hoping that someone, somewhere, was listening. We have eyes on high-value targets but are taking effective fire from superior forces. Request immediate extraction or air support. We cannot hold this position much longer. The response came back in a voice that carried the kind of authority that made experienced special operations personnel pay attention, transmitted on a frequency that somehow cut through the electronic jamming like a knife through silk. Bravo 6, this is Viper 2-6. I have your position marked and am observing hostile forces converging on your location. What's your mission status? Morrison had worked with Air Force pilots before, had called in close air support from A-10 Warthogs, and coordinated with F-16s during precision strikes. But he'd never heard a pilot transmit with the kind of calm professionalism that suggested she was somehow unaffected by the chaos erupting around both their positions. Viper 2-6. We are conducting classified reconnaissance on weapons facilities approximately 2 kilometers east of our position. We have confirmation of technologies that do not match current intelligence assessments. Copy that, Bravo 6. I'm seeing the same anomalies from my position. Stand by for tactical assessment. What Morrison couldn't see, what his ground-based equipment couldn't detect, was the way Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski was flying her F-22 through an electronic warfare environment that would have overwhelmed pilots with twice her experience. She was using techniques that weren't taught in any flight school, improvisations developed during years of flying missions that officially never happened, adaptations that turned the enemy's technological advantages into tactical opportunities. Her aircraft's radar was being jammed, so she was navigating by passive sensors that detected infrared signatures and electromagnetic emissions. Her communications were being interfered with, so she was using burst transmissions and frequency hopping techniques that turned her radio into a digital ghost. Her weapons systems were being targeted by electronic countermeasures, so she was flying manually, using instincts developed through thousands of hours of flight time to position her aircraft for attacks that her targeting computers couldn't calculate. Below, through the strengthening morning light, she could see the SEAL team's position marked by muzzle flashes and the distinctive signatures of American equipment under fire. Beyond them, the weapons facility that had brought them all to this valley was revealing itself to be something far more sophisticated than intelligence assessments had suggested. The buildings were camouflaged with materials that absorbed radar and infrared signatures, but from her altitude, she could see the geometric precision of their construction, the telltale signs of underground facilities connected by tunnels that spoke of years of development. But it was the missile batteries that held her attention, surface-to-air systems arranged in overlapping fields of fire that created a defensive network sophisticated enough to challenge even stealth aircraft. The enemy hadn't just ambushed her wingman. They'd created a killing field designed specifically for advanced American fighters, using intelligence that could only have come from sources with access to the most classified operational details. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about compromised intelligence or enemy technological advancement. This was about betrayal at levels that reached into the highest echelons of military command, about operations that had been sold to enemy forces before they'd even been planned. Somewhere in the chain of command, someone was feeding targeting data to forces that were using it to kill American military personnel with surgical precision. as she rolled her F-22 into a dive that would either save the SEAL team below or add her name to the casualty list. Lieutenant Colonel Raven Kowalski made a decision that would echo through military history. She was going to find out who had sold them out, and she was going to make them pay for every drop of American blood spilled in this nameless valley. But first, she was going to show the enemy what happened when they trapped a Valkyrie in their carefully laid web. The first indication that Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski was about to redefine modern air combat came through the passive sensors of every aircraft within 200 miles. Her F-22 Raptor, until that moment running silent to avoid detection, suddenly became the loudest electronic signature in the theater as she activated every system the aircraft possessed simultaneously. Her radar went active with a power output that burned through enemy jamming like a searchlight through fog. Her electronic warfare suite began broadcasting on frequencies that turned enemy communications into static-filled chaos. Her weapons systems came online with target acquisition speeds that overwhelmed defensive networks designed to handle conventional attacks. But it was her voice, transmitted on a frequency that somehow reached every friendly unit in the area despite sophisticated interference, that announced the arrival of something new in the battlefield equation. All stations, this is Viper 26. I am declaring emergency combat authority under Article 7 of the Rules of Engagement. Any hostile force engaging American personnel is now designated a priority target for immediate neutralization. Article 7 was a legal construct that most pilots knew existed but had never seen invoked, a provision that allowed individual commanders to escalate force levels when friendly units were under imminent threat of destruction. It was the kind of authorization that was supposed to come from flag officers after careful deliberation, not from individual pilots operating alone in hostile airspace. But Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's service record included classified operations where she'd been granted similar authority, missions where split-second decisions had prevented disasters that would have made international headlines. On the ground, Lieutenant Commander Morrison felt the change before he saw it, a subtle shift in the electromagnetic spectrum that his equipment registered as a massive increase in friendly electronic emissions. Bravo 6 to Viper 26, I'm reading significant system activations from your position. Are you preparing for close air support? The response came back with the kind of professional calm that Morrison had learned to associate with special operations personnel operating at the absolute peak of their capabilities. Bravo 6, I'm preparing to demonstrate why enemy forces should think twice before engaging American military personnel. Keep your heads down and mark your positions with infrared strobes. This is about to get loud. What followed was the kind of aerial display that would be studied in military academies for generations, a demonstration of what happened when advanced technology met tactical innovation and absolute determination. Kowalski's F-22 didn't attack the enemy positions. It systematically dismantled them, using precision-guided munitions with an accuracy that spoke of targeting calculations performed at superhuman speeds. The first missile battery to die was the one that had killed her wingman, erased from existence by a GBU-39 small-diameter bomb that struck with such precision that neighboring systems weren't even damaged by the explosion. The second battery was destroyed by a technique that military analysts would debate for years, a kinetic strike using the F-22's own mass as a weapon, the aircraft diving at supersonic speeds before pulling out at an altitude that allowed its wake turbulence to flip the missile launcher like a toy. But it was the electronic warfare demonstration that made enemy commanders realize they were facing something unprecedented. Kowalski's aircraft began broadcasting signals that turned enemy communications equipment against itself, using their own frequencies to deliver viruses that crashed defensive networks and guidance systems. Surface-to-air missiles launched at her aircraft began tracking each other instead of their intended target. Radar installations began displaying false targets that led their operators to waste ammunition on phantom contacts. Within 12 minutes, the elaborate defensive network that had taken months to construct was reduced to smoking wreckage and confused personnel. The enemy ground forces, deprived of air defense coverage and electronic support, found themselves exposed to observation and attack from an aircraft they couldn't detect, track, or engage. Their carefully planned operation was collapsing into chaos, and the American assets they'd been sent to capture or destroy were not only surviving but systematically destroying everything the enemy had invested in this theater of operations. In the Pentagon bunker, General Hawthorne was watching displays that challenged everything she thought she knew about modern air combat. "Colonel Mitchell, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" "Yes, ma'am. One aircraft, operating alone, has just neutralized an integrated air defense network that our intelligence assessments suggested would require a full strike package to penetrate. And she's doing it using techniques that aren't in any tactical manual I've ever read." The general's expression shifted from concern to something approaching awe as she realized that she was watching the emergence of a new paradigm in military aviation. "Get me everything we have on Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's training record and operational history. I have a feeling we're about to learn that we've been significantly underestimating one of our own personnel." But as the communications team worked to compile the requested information, Colonel Mitchell noticed something that made his blood run cold. The electronic signatures that Kowalski's aircraft was broadcasting, the techniques she was using to neutralize enemy systems, they matched classified research projects that weren't supposed to exist outside of theoretical studies conducted in facilities that officially didn't exist. "General," he said quietly, "I think we need to consider the possibility that Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski has had access to capabilities that weren't included in her official briefing materials. Because what she's doing out there isn't just improvisation. It's the practical application of technologies that are years ahead of anything we've acknowledged deploying." The implication hung in the air between them like a dangerous secret. If Kowalski was using advanced technologies without authorization, it suggested security breaches that reached into the most classified military research programs. If she was improvising these capabilities in real time, it suggested that the Air Force had somehow failed to recognize and develop one of the most tactically innovative pilots in military history. Either way, the woman currently redefining air combat doctrine in the skies over Syria represented a mystery that demanded immediate investigation. As Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski rolled her F-22 into a holding pattern above the SEAL team's position, she was unaware that her actions were being analyzed by intelligence personnel who were beginning to realize that the most dangerous secret in this operation wasn't enemy technological advancement. It was the untapped potential of American military personnel who had been systematically overlooked by promotion boards and assignment officers who valued conformity over innovation. The silence that followed the destruction of the enemy defensive network was more profound than the electronic chaos that had preceded it. Lieutenant Commander Morrison, accustomed to the controlled violence of special operations, found himself witnessing something that transcended conventional military action and approached the realm of artistic expression. The burning wreckage scattered throughout the valley represented not just tactical success, but a fundamental demonstration of what individual excellence could accomplish when freed from institutional constraints. "Bravo 6 to Viper 2-6, he transmitted, his voice carrying a respect that went beyond professional courtesy. "Outstanding work. The area is clear of air defense threats and enemy forces are withdrawing. How copy?" The response came back with the kind of understated professionalism that Morrison had learned to associate with operators who had just accomplished something extraordinary while making it look routine. "Copy. Bravo 6. Area is secure for the next 15 minutes. Recommend you complete your mission objectives and prepare for extraction. I'll maintain overwatch until friendly forces arrive." But what Morrison couldn't see, what his ground-based sensors couldn't detect, was the way Kowalski was using the breathing space she'd created to conduct an investigation that would reveal the true scope of the betrayal they'd all walked into. Her aircraft's intelligence-gathering capabilities, enhanced by modifications that weren't reflected in any official documentation, were systematically cataloging the wreckage below and painting a picture of enemy capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about global power balances. The missile systems she destroyed weren't just advanced, they were revolutionary, incorporating technologies that represented quantum leaps in guidance systems, electronic warfare capabilities, and materials science. The facilities the SEAL team was investigating weren't just weapons manufacturing sites. They were research installations where theoretical concepts were being turned into operational realities by personnel with access to information that could only have come from the most classified American research programs. As she transmitted encrypted data bursts to intelligence collection platforms operating at the edge of space, Kowalski was documenting evidence of technology transfer operations that would reshape international security considerations for decades. But more importantly, she was gathering proof that the betrayal that had led to this ambush extended far beyond simple intelligence leaks and into systematic technology transfer operations, managed by individuals with access to information that didn't appear on any organizational chart. Overwatch, this is Viper 26, she transmitted on a frequency that bypassed conventional communication networks and connected directly to crisis management facilities buried beneath Washington, D.C. I am transmitting priority intelligence on technologies that suggest systematic compromise of classified research programs. Request immediate activation of counterintelligence protocols and forensic analysis of personnel with access to theoretical weapons research. The response came back within seconds, carrying the kind of authority that confirmed her transmissions were reaching decision-makers at the highest levels of military command. Viper 26, this is Overwatch Actual. Your intelligence is being processed in real time. Continue operations as directed and maintain communication security. Be advised that your actions are being monitored by personnel who are very interested in your tactical innovations. The phrase Overwatch Actual told her that her communications had reached the National Military Command Center, where senior military leaders were directly monitoring operations with strategic implications. The reference to tactical innovations suggested that her improvised techniques were being analyzed by personnel who understood that individual excellence could sometimes transcend institutional limitations in ways that created new paradigms for military operations. But it was the subtle emphasis on personnel who are very interested that confirmed what she'd already begun to suspect. Her career had been shaped by forces operating beyond conventional military bureaucracy, guided by individuals who recognized potential that promotion boards and assignment officers had somehow overlooked. The modifications to her aircraft, the access to classified research data, the assignments that had given her experience with technologies that officially didn't exist, it all pointed to careful cultivation by mentors who understood that exceptional capability required exceptional opportunity. Below, the SEAL team was completing their mission with the kind of methodical precision that special operations personnel brought to objectives that could reshape international security considerations. The intelligence they were gathering would confirm what Kowalski's aerial reconnaissance had already documented: a systematic technology transfer operation that had given enemy forces capabilities that officially existed only in theoretical research, conducted in facilities that weren't supposed to be operational. But as Lieutenant Commander Morrison prepared his team for extraction, he was unaware that the real significance of their mission lay not in the intelligence they were gathering, but in the demonstration of individual excellence they were witnessing. The pilot maintaining Overwatch above their position represented something that military institutions had struggled to recognize and develop: the emergence of capability that transcended conventional training and approached the realm of strategic innovation. As her F-22 maintained its protective orbit, Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski was calculating fuel consumption rates and extraction timelines, while simultaneously processing intelligence that would influence military planning for years to come. Her aircraft's sensors were detecting electromagnetic signatures that suggested enemy forces were regrouping for another assault, but with coordination patterns that indicated they were receiving guidance from sources with access to real-time American intelligence. The tactical picture was becoming clear, painted in radio frequencies and electronic emissions that told a story of betrayal extending far beyond this single operation. The enemy forces gathering in the surrounding hills weren't just equipped with advanced weapons. They were being commanded by personnel who understood American tactical doctrine well enough to counter it systematically. Their communication protocols incorporated security measures that mirrored classified American procedures. Their electronic warfare capabilities demonstrated familiarity with specific vulnerabilities in American systems that were known to only a handful of defense contractors and government analysts. Someone with access to the highest levels of military intelligence was feeding operational details to enemy forces, using that information to create killing fields designed specifically for American military personnel. The ambush that had killed her wingman wasn't an accident of war. It was assassination guided by someone who knew exactly which aircraft would be flying this mission and exactly how they would approach their targets. As she transmitted this analysis to intelligence collection platforms that would route it directly to counterintelligence personnel, Kowalski was setting in motion investigations that would expose betrayal reaching into the highest levels of military command. But more importantly, she was demonstrating that individual excellence, when properly supported and strategically deployed, could overcome institutional failures that threatened national security. The extraction helicopter that appeared on the horizon 15 minutes later carried more than just rescue personnel. It transported investigators who would spend months analyzing the intelligence gathered during the previous hour. The technologies documented by both the SEAL team and Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski would lead to security reviews that would reshape military research protocols and personnel vetting procedures. The tactical innovations demonstrated during the aerial engagement would be incorporated into training programs that would influence military aviation for generations. But the most significant outcome of the operation would be the recognition that exceptional capability, when freed from institutional constraints and supported by mentors who understood its potential, could transform individual excellence into strategic advantage that transcended conventional military doctrine. The flight back to Ramstein Air Base gave Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski time to process the implications of what had occurred during the previous 2 hours. Her fuel consumption had been within acceptable parameters, despite the extended combat operations. Her aircraft systems had performed flawlessly despite electronic warfare attacks that would have overwhelmed conventional platforms. Her tactical innovations had proven effective against threats that represented the most sophisticated challenge to American air superiority since the development of stealth technology. But it was the radio traffic during the return flight that confirmed what she'd begun to suspect about the forces that had shaped her career. The communications weren't coming from conventional command structures. They were originating from facilities that didn't appear on any organizational chart, transmitted by personnel whose voices carried the kind of authority that suggested they operated beyond typical military hierarchies. Viper 2-6, this is Overwatch Deep, came a transmission on a frequency that her aircraft's communications suite accessed automatically despite having no record of its existence in any technical manual. Your performance has been noted by personnel who have been following your career development with considerable interest. Request: you maintain operational security regarding today's events and prepare for assignment to duties that will better utilize your demonstrated capabilities. The phrase Overwatch Deep identified sources that operated at classification levels above top secret, personnel who managed operations that influenced global security without appearing in any official documentation. The reference to career development suggested that her assignments had been guided by individuals who recognized potential that conventional promotion systems had failed to identify and cultivate. As her F-22 crossed into friendly airspace and began its descent toward the runway where debriefing officers were already waiting, Kowalski realized that her military career was about to undergo a transformation that would either unlock opportunities she'd never imagined or destroy her future in ways she couldn't predict. Because the demonstration of capability that had saved American lives and exposed systematic betrayal had also revealed that she possessed skills and knowledge that raised questions about how she'd acquired them, and who had provided her with access to capabilities that officially didn't exist. The aircraft that touched down on the runway at Ramstein Air Base carried more than just a pilot returning from a successful mission. It transported evidence that would reshape military intelligence operations and proof that individual excellence, when properly recognized and developed, could transcend institutional limitations in ways that created new paradigms for national defense. But as the engines wound down and maintenance personnel began their post-flight inspections, Lieutenant Colonel Raven Kowalski was unaware that the most significant challenge of her career lay not in the enemies she'd defeated, but in explaining to superiors how she'd acquired capabilities that weren't supposed to exist and used them to accomplish objectives that were supposed to be impossible. The debriefing room at Ramstein Air Base had been configured for standard post-mission analysis, but the personnel waiting for Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski represented anything but standard military bureaucracy. The men and women seated around the polished conference table wore uniforms that carried minimal insignia, spoke with accents that suggested international backgrounds, and asked questions that demonstrated familiarity with classified programs that weren't supposed to be operational. "Colonel Kowalski," began a woman whose uniform indicated Air Force affiliation, but whose bearing suggested special operations background. "Your tactical performance today exceeded parameters that our modeling suggested were achievable by individual operators. We're interested in understanding how you developed the capabilities you demonstrated." The question was phrased with the kind of precision that indicated careful preparation by personnel who understood that exceptional performance often involved factors that didn't appear in official training records. But it also carried implications that made Kowalski realize she was being evaluated by individuals who suspected she'd had access to resources that weren't reflected in her personnel file. "Ma'am, I utilized tactics developed through operational experience and adapted standard aircraft capabilities to counter threats that weren't anticipated in my briefing materials," she replied, using language that acknowledged her innovations while avoiding details that might compromise classified capabilities. A man whose uniform carried no rank insignia, but whose presence commanded the room's attention, leaned forward, with the kind of focus that Kowalski had learned to associate with senior intelligence personnel. "Colonel, the electronic warfare techniques you employed suggest familiarity with research conducted in facilities that don't appear in your assignment history. We're curious about how you acquired knowledge of capabilities that are several years ahead of acknowledged development timelines." The implication was clear. She was suspected of having unauthorized access to classified research programs, or of being involved with foreign intelligence services that had provided her with advanced technological capabilities. Either possibility would end her career and potentially result in criminal prosecution for violations of espionage laws that carried life sentences. But before she could formulate a response that would protect both her future and the security of programs she wasn't supposed to know about, the conference room's main display activated with imagery that transformed the entire nature of the meeting. Satellite reconnaissance showed the valley where her morning mission had taken place, but the facilities that appeared in the high-resolution images challenged everything that intelligence assessments had suggested about enemy capabilities. The weapons manufacturing sites that the SEAL team had been sent to investigate were revealed to be components of a complex that stretched for miles underground, connected by tunnels that housed production facilities for technologies that represented decades of advancement over anything intelligence analysts had suspected existed. The missile systems she destroyed were prototypes of weapons that wouldn't officially be developed for years, incorporating guidance technologies and electronic warfare capabilities that suggested access to research conducted in the most classified American facilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the woman who had initially questioned her, her voice carrying a gravity that transformed the meeting from personnel evaluation to strategic briefing. "The intelligence gathered during today's operation has revealed a systematic technology transfer program that threatens fundamental assumptions about global power balances. The enemy forces that Colonel Kowalski engaged were equipped with weapons that incorporate research conducted in facilities that aren't supposed to exist, using information that could only have been provided by sources with access to the highest levels of classified programs." The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. The ambush that had killed Captain Rodriguez hadn't been the result of routine intelligence gathering by enemy forces. It had been an assassination attempt guided by someone with intimate knowledge of American operational planning and technological capabilities. The facilities they'd been sent to investigate weren't just weapons manufacturing sites. They were production centers where stolen American research was being turned into operational systems designed specifically to counter American military advantages. "Colonel Kowalski," continued the senior intelligence officer, "your tactical innovations today didn't just save American lives. They exposed a betrayal that extends to the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. The capabilities you demonstrated suggest that you've been prepared for missions like today's by personnel who understood that conventional training wouldn't be sufficient to counter the threats we're facing." The phrase "prepared for missions like today's" confirmed what she'd long suspected about the forces that had shaped her career. The assignments that had given her experience with advanced technologies, the modifications to her aircraft that weren't reflected in official documentation, the access to research facilities that didn't appear in any organizational chart. It all represented preparation for confronting enemies who possessed capabilities that conventional military training couldn't counter. "Ma'am," she replied, choosing her words carefully, "I've been privileged to work with personnel who recognize that emerging threats would require innovative responses. My training has been enhanced by exposure to research programs that explored the practical applications of theoretical concepts. Today's mission demonstrated that exceptional challenges require exceptional capabilities." The woman's expression shifted to something approaching approval, as she recognized that Kowalski understood the delicate balance between acknowledging special preparation and protecting classified programs. "Colonel, the personnel who have been guiding your career development believe that you represent something new in military aviation, an operator who can adapt theoretical capabilities to operational realities in ways that create strategic advantages. Today's performance confirmed their assessment." As the debriefing continued, Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski realized that her military career had been shaped by individuals who operated beyond conventional command structures. Personnel who understood that future conflicts would require capabilities that transcended traditional military doctrine. The demonstrations of tactical innovation that had saved the SEAL team and exposed systematic betrayal had also revealed that she'd been carefully prepared for missions that officially didn't exist by mentors who recognized potential that promotion boards had somehow overlooked. The question now was whether she was ready for assignments that would take her beyond conventional military operations and into realms where individual excellence could influence global security in ways that traditional military structures couldn't achieve. The implications of Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski's mission extended far beyond the successful rescue of the SEAL team or the destruction of enemy defensive systems. Analysis of the intelligence she'd gathered revealed a technology transfer network that had systematically compromised American military advantages for over a decade, providing enemy forces with capabilities that intelligence assessments had suggested wouldn't be developed for years. In secure facilities scattered across 3 continents, intelligence analysts were processing data that challenged fundamental assumptions about global power balances and military technological development. The electronic warfare signatures that Kowalski's aircraft had detected suggested enemy forces possessed jamming capabilities that could neutralize American stealth advantages. The guidance systems recovered from destroyed missile batteries incorporated technologies that mirrored classified American research conducted in facilities that weren't supposed to be operational. The communication protocols intercepted during the engagement demonstrated security measures that duplicated procedures known only to personnel with access to the most sensitive military programs. The evidence is conclusive, reported Dr. Sarah Chen, a defense analyst whose security clearance allowed her access to information that shaped national security policy at the highest levels. Enemy forces have systematic access to American military research that spans multiple classification levels and includes programs that officially don't exist. The technology transfer operation we've uncovered represents the most serious compromise of national security since the development of nuclear weapons. The briefing room where she presented her findings was located 17 floors beneath the Pentagon, in a facility where personnel made decisions that influenced global security without appearing in any official documentation. The men and women who listened to her analysis wore uniforms that carried minimal identifying information and spoke with the kind of authority that suggested they operated beyond conventional military hierarchies. General Patricia Hawthorne, whose presence at the briefing confirmed the strategic significance of the intelligence gathered during Kowalski's mission, studied reconnaissance imagery that revealed the true scope of enemy capabilities. Dr. Chen, your analysis suggests that our conventional approach to military technology development has been systematically compromised. How do we counter threats when the enemy possesses advanced knowledge of our capabilities? The question went to the heart of challenges that would reshape military doctrine for generations. If enemy forces could anticipate American technological developments and develop countermeasures in advance, then traditional approaches to maintaining military superiority were fundamentally obsolete. Success would require capabilities that transcended conventional doctrine and approaches that enemy intelligence services couldn't predict or counter. General, replied Dr. Chen, the solution lies in the tactical innovations demonstrated by personnel like Lieutenant Colonel Kowalski. Her improvised techniques succeeded because they weren't derived from conventional training programs or official doctrine. They represented individual adaptation that enemy intelligence services couldn't anticipate because the capabilities themselves weren't documented in any system they'd infiltrated. The implication was clear. Future military success would depend on individual excellence that transcended institutional limitations. Operators who could adapt theoretical concepts to operational realities in ways that created tactical advantages enemy forces couldn't predict or counter. The military bureaucracy that had somehow overlooked Kowalski's potential represented systemic failures that threatened national security in fundamental ways. But as the briefing continued, General Hawthorne realized that the most significant intelligence gather